The evening air was crisp, the kind that carried the lingering scents of the ocean breeze mixed with the soft perfume of blooming jasmine along the elegant streets of Los Angeles. Inside Celeste, the city's most coveted fine dining restaurant, the atmosphere was one of understated opulence. Crystal chandeliers cast a golden glow over meticulously arranged tables, where each dish was plated like a masterpiece, a perfect blend of artistry and culinary precision. Before we dive deeper into this story, let us know where you're watching from, and if you love stories like this, hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow, we have another special tale waiting just for you. In a dimly lit corner, Keanu Reeves sat alone, absorbed in quiet solitude. His signature understated style set him apart from the glitz and glamour surrounding him. A simple black blazer, jeans, and his well-worn boots, a stark contrast to the polished perfection of Celeste's usual clientele. He wasn't here to be noticed. He never was. Instead, he had chosen the restaurant for its ambience, a place where he could enjoy a good meal, reflect on his latest charity project, and perhaps, if the mood allowed, turn a few pages of the book he had tucked under his arm. The soft clinking of glasses, murmured conversations, and the occasional bursts of laughter created an elegant harmony. Keanu, unfazed by the luxury around him, sipped his wine slowly, savoring the moment of peace. But peace never lasted long in a world obsessed with spectacle. The grand doors of Celeste swung open, shattering the evening's delicate tranquility. Ava Sinclair had arrived. Her entrance was as theatrical as her online persona, a vision of designer excess. She strode in wearing an embellished dress that shimmered under the warm lights, every detail calculated for maximum impact. Her phone was already live-streaming as she held it high, flashing a picture-perfect smile that felt more rehearsed than real. To her 2.5 million followers, she was unstoppable. Ava, the ultimate influencer, an embodiment of success, luxury, and VIP exclusivity. In her world, if you weren't broadcasting your every move, did it even happen? Okay, guys, we're at the most exclusive restaurant in LA tonight, she announced, her voice dripping with performative excitement. You literally cannot get a reservation here unless you're, like, someone. Trailing behind her, her assistant struggled to keep up, juggling a ring light and her designer handbag, ensuring Ava was bathed in just the right amount of glow. The staff of Celeste barely reacted. They had seen her type before, the kind that snapped their fingers at waiters, sent dishes back for the slightest imperfection, and cared more about perception than experience. As Ava posed for her livestream audience, her eyes scanned the restaurant, flitting past tables adorned with elegant patrons. Then, her gaze landed on the man in the corner. At first, she barely registered with him. His outfit was nothing remarkable. No branded statement pieces, no glittering jewelry, just an effortlessly composed man, entirely at ease in his own company. He wasn't looking at her. He wasn't trying to get into the background of her live stream. He was just there, and that annoyed her. Ava settled into her prime position table, meticulously chosen for its lighting and aesthetic appeal. Every detail had been curated, the soft golden glow from the chandelier above, the velvet upholstery complementing her designer dress, and, most importantly, the background, which needed to be nothing short of perfection for her audience. Yet, no matter how she angled her phone, adjusted the settings, or repositioned herself, there was one glaring problem she couldn't edit out. Keanu Reeves kept appearing in the frame. Her lips pursed in frustration, and she flicked her platinum blonde hair over her shoulder with an exaggerated sigh. "This is impossible," she muttered, shifting in her seat. "I can't have some random old guy ruining my feed." She turned sharply to her assistant, a young woman whose exhaustion was masked only by the professional poise she had learned to maintain. The assistant had long perfected the art of anticipating Ava's demands, but this particular request made her hesitate. "Go ask him to move," Ava instructed, barely sparing a glance in Keanu's direction. The assistant hesitated. "Ava, I don't pay you to think. I pay you to fix things." Ava cut in, her tone clipped and impatient. laced with the entitlement of someone who was used to getting her way. The assistant swallowed, shifting on her feet. She knew better than to argue, but this felt like a line she wasn't willing to cross. When she didn't immediately move, Ava let out an exasperated huff, rolling her eyes before pushing herself up from her seat. If she wanted something done right, she'd do it herself. With a practice strut, she crossed the restaurant floor, her designer heels clicking against the marble, each step a declaration of self-importance. The soft murmur of conversations around her dimmed as heads subtly turned to watch her approach. Keanu, completely unaware of the impending confrontation, leisurely flipped another page of his book, lost in his own world. Ava stopped beside his table, one manicured hand finding its place on her hip. She tilted her head slightly, the carefully rehearsed pose of someone who had spent years crafting their image to perfection. "Excuse me," she said, her voice coated in honeyed politeness, the kind that was more condescending than kind. "Would you mind moving to another table? You're, totally ruining my shot. And I'm trying to create content here." Keanu looked up, his dark eyes steady and unreadable. He took his time setting down his glass of water, his movements deliberate, unhurried. There was an unmistakable presence about him, the kind that didn't need to be loud or flashy to command attention. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice smooth and even, "but I was here first." Ava blinked, clearly not expecting resistance. Her lips parted as if she wanted to argue, but she quickly forced a tight-lipped smile instead. "Okay, but do you even know who I am?" she asked, her voice carrying the edge of someone accustomed to being recognized. Keanu tilted his head slightly, as if considering her question. Then, with a polite but indifferent shrug, he answered, "No." The word landed like a slap. Ava let out a sharp, incredulous laugh, shaking her head. "You're kidding, right? I have 2.5 million followers. That's more people than some countries have." Keanu gave a slow nod, unaffected. "That's a lot of people," he acknowledged, his tone neutral, thoughtful even, but utterly unimpressed. By now, the restaurant had grown noticeably quieter. Conversations had paused, and diners had begun paying attention. Their curiosity piqued. Some turned in their seats, a few casually reaching for their phones, anticipating something worth capturing. Ava's patience wore thinner by the second, her arms folded across her chest as she leaned slightly forward, her frustration barely masked. "I probably make more in a month than you do in a year," she sneered. "You should really be thanking me for even speaking to you." Keanu exhaled through his nose, the barest hint of a smile playing at the edges of his lips. It wasn't smugness, nor arrogance. It was something worse, amusement, the quiet kind that comes when someone thinks they hold all the power, only to realize they don't. Without a word, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He scrolled leisurely for a moment, then turned the screen toward her. "Looks like I have 4.1 million followers myself," he said. Ava's confident smirk faltered. The shift in the room was immediate. A ripple of murmured reactions spread through the restaurant. Soft laughter, hushed whispers. The air had changed, and Ava felt it pressing down on her perfectly curated world. Her assistant, still lingering near their table, covered her mouth in shock. Diners discreetly lifted their phones, recording the moment, some already typing captions that would go viral within minutes. Ava's posture stiffened. She could feel the weight of every gaze in the room, the energy shifting against her in real time. For the first time in a long time, Ava Sinclair, unstoppable Ava, was speechless. Keanu, still composed, still utterly unbothered, returned his phone to his pocket. He picked up his book, turned another page, and without another glance, continued reading. The evening had returned to its natural rhythm. For him, at least. For Ava, her night had just taken an irreversible turn. Ava's manicured fingers snatched the phone from Keanu's hand before she even registered what she was doing. Her eyes scanned the screen, her breathing quickening with each passing second. The verified blue checkmark next to the name Keanu Reeves stared back at her, unwavering, undeniable. Her face paled. This has to be fake," she sputtered. her voice faltering as she turned the device at different angles, as if a shift in perspective could alter reality. Keanu, unbothered, gently took his phone back, placing it calmly on the table beside his untouched book. He met her gaze with quiet patience, his expression unreadable, yet carrying an air of effortless certainty. "Why would I need to fake being myself?" he asked, his voice low and steady, as if he were explaining something simple to someone making it unnecessarily complicated. A ripple of whispers spread through the restaurant. The quiet murmurs of intrigue turned into barely contained amusement. Some guests were grinning behind their napkins. Others exchanged knowing looks. A few had their phones subtly aimed in Ava's direction, capturing every second of her unraveling. Ava's lips pressed into a thin line, her frustration bubbling beneath the surface. She straightened her posture, chin lifting in defiance. "This isn't happening," she muttered under her breath, her fingers twitching toward her own phone. Then, with a sharp inhale, she declared, "I'm going live. Right now." Keanu merely shrugged, taking a slow sip of his drink. "Go ahead," he said, his tone neither confrontational nor indulgent, just the calm of someone who had seen this kind of spectacle play out before. Ava's perfectly manicured nails tapped furiously at her screen, and within seconds, her live stream was broadcasting to millions. She turned the camera on herself, her voice dripping with exaggerated emotion. "Hey guys, I'm literally being harassed right now by this random old guy at Celeste. Can you believe this?" Her voice rose in pitch, her dramatics intensifying. "I'm just trying to create content, and he's being so rude." Then, her comment section flooded. At first, she didn't read them, too caught up in her performance. But then the screen started filling at an alarming speed. "Wait, is that Keanu Reeves? You just embarrassed yourself in front of John Wick. Girl, you just lost the entire internet. You tried to flex on Keanu?" Oh no. Her heart pounded as she scrolled through the reactions. The flood of laughing emojis, face bombs, and "no way" comments made her breath hitch. Then, something even worse, her follower count, the number she had spent years obsessing over, started plummeting. Thousands, then tens of thousands. The number kept dropping. Her hands trembled slightly as she tried to salvage the situation. "Wait, no, guys, he was being rude first. He wouldn't move when I asked nicely," she protested, her voice cracking with the strain of forced confidence. The comments didn't slow. "Nicely? You mean when you demanded like a spoiled brat? I'd move for Keanu before I'd move for you. Ma'am, take the L and go home." The restaurant, once merely amused, was now openly entertained. A few guests chuckled softly. Some whispered among themselves, pointing discreetly. Even the waitstaff, trained to remain neutral, exchanged smirks as they passed by. Ava's assistant, standing awkwardly near their table, looked at the screen in horror, then at Ava, as if debating whether to step in or let the inevitable unfold. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. There was nothing to say. Keanu, meanwhile, had already returned to his book, his drink in hand, entirely unbothered by the drama unraveling before him. The more Ava flailed, the calmer he seemed. It was a contrast that only made her spiral faster. In a last-ditch effort, Ava flipped the camera back to Keanu. "Okay, whatever. Let's ask him," she huffed, forcing a laugh that lacked all sincerity. "Hey, Keanu." He looked up, raising an eyebrow at the sound of his name. The way he did it, with that effortless grace, the kind that didn't need to fight for attention, only made the moment more powerful. Ava hesitated. For the first time, she saw what everyone else saw. She had already lost. Keanu didn't need to say anything else. He didn't need to argue. He didn't need to prove himself. He simply was, and that was more than enough. The weight of that realization settled into Ava's shoulders, her phone still streaming as her audience turned against her in real time. Her grip tightened around the device before she finally, abruptly, ended the broadcast. Silence fell between them. The damage had been done. The internet had already decided. She had spent years building an empire of attention, only to have it crumble in the span of minutes. Her lips parted, as if to speak, but no words came. Keanu studied her for a moment, not with malice or amusement, but with something quieter, something like understanding. Then, with a slight nod, he picked up his book and resumed reading, as if nothing had ever happened. For the restaurant, the night carried on. Desperation clawed at Ava's chest as she spun on her heel, her rage simmering beneath the surface. Her night had gone from glamorous to humiliating in mere minutes, and she wasn't about to let it end this way. Head held high, she stormed across the restaurant, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor as she made a beeline for the manager. The distinguished older gentleman, his silver hair neatly combed, stood with the effortless poise of someone who had seen far too much to be easily rattled. He had managed Celeste for over 2 decades, dealing with celebrities, tycoons, and socialites alike. But tonight, he had witnessed something different, something distasteful. Ava's hands curled into fists at her sides. "I want him removed," she shrieked, her voice rising an octave too high, teetering on the edge of hysteria. "I will ruin this place with one post. Do you have any idea who I am?" The manager's expression didn't flicker. His gaze remained steady, composed, the weight of his years of experience settling behind his eyes as he measured her outburst. Slowly, deliberately, he glanced toward Keanu's table, where the actor still sat quietly reading, as if the chaos around him was nothing more than background noise. Then, the manager turned back to Ava. "Miss Sinclair," he said, his voice polite but firm, unwavering in its authority. "I'm afraid I must ask you to leave." The words struck her like a slap. Ava's jaw dropped, her breath hitching in disbelief. "What?" she choked out, her fingers tightening around her phone as if it were a lifeline. "But—" The manager lifted a hand, silencing her before she could spew another word. "We reserve the right to refuse service to anyone who disrespects our guests," he continued, his voice carrying through the room with quiet command. A murmur rippled through the restaurant. Then, as if a switch had been flipped, applause erupted. Some diners clapped politely, others hooped, and a few even laughed under their breath. Ava's face burned as the sound filled her ears, a humiliating symphony of rejection. Her breath came in sharp, shallow gasps as she turned, hoping, praying, for some last-minute sympathy from Keanu. He had to understand. He was supposed to be the kind one, wasn't he? Maybe if she could appeal to him, she could salvage what was left of her dignity. But Keanu simply met her gaze with that same quiet, knowing look. There was no malice in his expression, no gloating, no triumphant smirk, just the same steady patience he had shown all evening. As if he had expected this moment to come, he offered her a small, courteous nod. "Have a good evening," he said, his voice calm, unwavering, the final nail in her coffin. Ava felt the walls closing in around her. Her hands trembled as she gripped her phone tighter, her perfectly curated world crashing down in real time. Her eyes darted around, searching for an escape, for someone, anyone, to come to her defense. But all she saw were amused faces, waiting for her next move. Then, the ultimate betrayal. From behind her, her assistant, who had spent the last 3 years catering to her every whim, absorbing her tantrums, fixing her mistakes, shook her head slowly. The younger woman's face was pale, her lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes brimming with something Ava hadn't expected to see. Shame. The assistant exhaled, then took a step back. "I quit," she muttered, her voice barely above a whisper, but carrying more weight than any of Ava's threats had all night. And with that, she turned on her heel and walked away. Ava's breath hitched, her throat tightened. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. The sense of control she had always relied on, the power that had fueled her confidence, had slipped right through her fingers, leaving nothing but a gaping void of humiliation. Fury surged within her, desperate and misplaced. Without another word, she grabbed her phone, her fingers clenching around it like a weapon, and stormed toward the exit. Her designer heels pounded against the floor, each step sharp and angry. The doors of Celeste swung open, and as she stepped outside into the cold Los Angeles night, the realization finally hit her. This wasn't just a bad night. The internet exploded. By morning, Ava Sinclair's empire was crumbling. The fallout was swift, relentless, and inescapable. Her sponsors had pulled out, severing ties in carefully worded statements that distanced themselves from her behavior. Her once loyal followers turned against her, flooding her social media with comments she had no power to control. The hashtags humbled Ava and respect over followers trended worldwide, overshadowing her carefully curated brand of exclusivity and excess. Meanwhile, Keanu? His quiet wisdom had gone viral. Clips of the encounter at Celeste spread like wildfire, shared by celebrities, influencers, and everyday people alike. His effortless composure, his calm defiance in the face of entitlement, it resonated with millions. It wasn't just the fact that he was famous. It was the way he had handled the situation without arrogance, without cruelty, without ever needing to raise his voice. One comment, amidst the thousands, stood out. Respect isn't measured in followers. It's measured in character. It was reposted, quoted, shared across platforms. A simple truth, one that cut through the noise of viral fame and influencer culture. And as the world dissected Ava's downfall and Keanu's quiet lesson, one thing became clear. People were tired of manufactured importance. They wanted something real. At Celeste, life moved on. The next evening, the restaurant was just as packed, just as full of whispered conversations and clinking glasses. But there was a different energy in the air, an unspoken reverence lingering in the aftermath of the previous night's spectacle. As Keanu stepped outside, the cool night air wrapped around him, crisp and refreshing. He took a deep breath, letting it settle. A soft hum of the city buzzed around him, cars rolling by, distant laughter, the muffled sounds of life continuing. The same young waiter from the night before followed him to the entrance, a nervous but excited energy buzzing around him. "Mr. Reeves," he started hesitantly, holding out the check. "Your bill's already been covered. The owner insists." Keanu smiled, shaking his head. "Then this is for you," he said, slipping a generous tip into the waiter's hand. The young man looked down, eyes widening at the amount. "Sir, I don't know what to say." Keanu clapped him lightly on the shoulder. "You don't have to say anything. Just remember, kindness lasts longer than fame." The waiter swallowed hard, nodding with a newfound respect. "Thank you for everything." Keanu gave a small nod before stepping into the street, his hands tucked into his pockets as he disappeared into the night. No entourage, no spectacle, no need for the world to watch his every move. But the world was watching and listening, because maybe, just maybe, amidst the chaos of viral trends and fleeting internet fame, someone out there had learned something about what truly matters. And perhaps, somewhere in the depths of her own reckoning, Ava Sinclair had, too. The night was over, but the lesson? That would last far longer. The fallout was immediate. By the time the sun rose over Los Angeles, Ava Sinclair's name was trending again, but for all the wrong reasons. Her Instagram comments were flooded with ridicule, her inbox with silence from sponsors who had once clamored to be associated with her brand. One by one, the high-profile collaborations she had so carefully cultivated announced their departures, issuing statements about values and ethics. Her manager's calls went straight to voicemail. Even her most devoted fans, those who had defended her through past controversies, seemed to be distancing themselves. The narrative had changed. People had seen her entitlement in real time, and no amount of damage control could rewrite what had been broadcast to millions. And then, there was the video. Not just the original confrontation at Celeste, but a second video, captured by another diner from across the room. This one had a different angle, a different perspective, one where another figure, unnoticed until now, was seated at a table not far from Keanu. Chuck Norris, the action legend, known for his quiet demeanor but undeniable presence, had been enjoying his meal in peace when the drama unfolded in front of him. In the video, he could be seen watching Ava's meltdown with an expression that could only be described as mild amusement. And then, as she stormed past his table after being asked to leave, she made her second mistake of the night. She bumped into him, hard, A collective gasp rippled through the restaurant as the impact sent her staggering back. But it wasn't Chuck Norris who stumbled, it was Ava, tripping over her own heels, her phone flying out of her hands and clattering onto the floor. The room went still. Chuck Norris, ever composed, glanced down at her, one brow slightly raised. Then, in a voice calm but unmistakably firm, he spoke 4 words. "Watch where you're going." The video ended there, but the internet didn't need more. The combination of Keanu's quiet humility and Chuck Norris' effortless authority was too much. The meme storm began immediately. Keanu Reeves humbles Ava Sinclair. Chuck Norris finishes the job. Ava wanted a viral moment. She got one. She disrespected John Wick and Walker. Texas Ranger? Pack it up, girl. The hashtags multiplied. Chuck Norris effect. Respect matters. Sit down, Ava. The memes came fast. The internet's version of poetic justice. Meanwhile, Keanu remained blissfully unaware of the online frenzy. He had other things to focus on. The next evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden hue over the city, Keanu found himself at a quiet, family-run diner on the outskirts of LA, a place where no one pulled out their phones to record him, where the owner still took orders by hand, where a meal was just a meal, not a social media event. As he waited for his coffee, the door jingled softly, and a figure hesitated in the entrance. Keanu didn't have to look up to know who it was. The hesitation, the way the air in the room subtly shifted, it told him everything. Ava Sinclair. But she was different now. Gone was the elaborate makeup, the designer heels, the perfect facade. She wore simple jeans and a hoodie, her platinum blonde hair pulled into a loose bun. No cameras, no entourage, just her. She stood there for a long moment, her fingers tightening around the strap of her bag. Then, slowly, she walked toward him. Keanu set his book down, meeting her gaze without judgment, just quiet observation. Ava swallowed, searching for words. The restaurant was silent, but not hostile, just waiting. She took a deep breath. "I think I owe you an apology." Keanu leaned back slightly, his expression unreadable. "For what?" Ava let out a small, humorless laugh, running a hand through her hair. "I don't even know where to start." He studied her for a long moment, then gestured to the empty seat across from him. "Then start here." Hesitating only briefly, she sat down. For the first time in a long time, Ava Sinclair wasn't performing. She wasn't live streaming, wasn't curating the moment for likes. She was just a person, sitting across from another person, trying to find her way back to something real. And as the evening wore on, as words were exchanged not for the world, but just for them, a small shift took place. Maybe, just maybe, there was still hope for redemption. The internet would move on. It always did. The memes would fade. The trends would shift. But the lesson? That would last far longer. The conversation started haltingly, Ava fidgeting with the napkin in front of her while Keanu sipped his coffee. Waiting. There was no rush, no expectations, just space to talk. "I've been living for validation," Ava admitted after a long pause. "Every like, every share, every sponsorship, it was all I cared about." She glanced out the window, watching cars pass by under the streetlights. "I thought influence meant power, that followers equaled respect." Keanu nodded slightly but didn't interrupt. He had learned long ago that silence often invited the truth better than words ever could. "I built my whole identity on it," she continued, her voice quieter now. "And then, last night happened." A small, dry laugh escaped her lips. "I didn't just embarrass myself, I unraveled. And Chuck Norris? Of all people? I practically ran into a living legend and made a fool of myself." Keanu's lips twitched in amusement. It was quite the spectacle. Ava shook her head, smiling despite herself. "Yeah, and then the internet did what it does best, tore me apart." Her smile faded. "But the worst part wasn't losing sponsorships or followers. I realized that no one was really standing up for me. Not my fans, not my so-called friends." Keanu's gaze softened. "Fame is a fickle thing." Ava nodded. "I guess I never thought about how shallow it all was until it collapsed." She exhaled deeply, finally turning her full attention to him. You didn't have to sit here and listen to me. Most people would have laughed and walked away. Keanu took a moment before responding. Most people don't need to be taught a lesson. They just need a chance to learn one. Ava blinked, his words hitting her harder than she expected. She had spent so much of her life assuming people either adored her or hated her. The idea that someone, especially someone as respected as Keanu Reeves, would see her as just a person, capable of growth, was something she wasn't used to. I don't want to be that person anymore, she said quietly. The one who treats people like props in my own personal show. Then don't be. Keanu said simply. Change isn't about words. It's about action. Ava nodded, her fingers tightening around her napkin. I don't know where to start. Keanu thought for a moment, then slid his book across the table toward her. She hesitated before picking it up, reading the cover. The Art of Living Simply. She looked at him in confusion. It's not about social media, Keanu explained, but it's a good read, and it might give you some perspective. Ava stared at the book, running her fingers over the cover. You're serious? He smiled slightly. Why not? For the first time in what felt like forever, Ava Sinclair had no retort, no clever comeback, just quiet acceptance. The next morning, Ava's phone buzzed relentlessly on her nightstand. Notifications, missed calls, frantic emails from her PR team. She ignored them all. Instead, she sat by her window, book in hand, turning the pages slowly, letting the words sink in. Her career wasn't over. Not yet. The internet had a short memory, and with the right moves, she could rebuild. But for once, she wasn't thinking about damage control. She was thinking about something Keanu had said the night before. Change isn't about words. It's about action. For the first time in her life, she wasn't just looking at the world through the lens of a phone screen. She was looking at it for real. And maybe, just maybe, that was the start of something better. As for Keanu, he had already moved on, back to his quiet life, back to being himself. No grand speeches, no social media victory laps, just a man who had shared a moment with someone in need of one. Because in the end, true influence wasn't about numbers. It was about impact. And Ava Sinclair? She was about to find out what that really meant.